think the fundamental point here is that, we've said it before, one of the comments that Milton Friedman, our sort of patron of Free to Choose Friday, was fond of saying, and that is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. You can have all the good intentions in the world for why you want to regulate big tech, but think about all the unintended consequences of it. And by the way, you can't even find agreement from left and right, those who advocate greater regulation, on what they should regulate, what the approach is. So how the hell can you even accomplish that objective if both sides can't agree on what to regulate or not to regulate? Which, by the way, underscores one significant point. President Trump, with all due respect, should not unilaterally, by executive order, be making these kinds of decisions. They ought to be ferreted out by legislators who can debate it, who can hash it out, who can take the time and have these discussions as they've been having the past couple of years. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg testified in 2018 in April. So now we're 2 years removed from his testimony. This debate's been going on. Okay, it's taking time. That should be a good thing. We should not be rushing legislators to regulate, and we should not be rushing the President of the United States to unilaterally regulate via executive order when Americans of all sorts of different stripes cannot even agree on the terms of the regulation, whether or not it should happen, what the basis for that regulation should be. Are you simply promoting all sorts of different viewpoints to be expressed? Or do you think that you should regulate certain viewpoints being expressed to make sure that you're not getting misinformation spread by Russian agents or by American companies or by American presidents? Making sure that they don't spread misinformation that could influence elections or influence people's viewpoints. Look, I don't like that Facebook and Twitter have been taking down, or YouTube have been taking down videos and posts and censoring individuals for content they believe to be spreading misinformation about coronavirus or about mail-in ballots. I agree. President Trump, in my view, is wrong when it comes to a lot of the facts about mail-in ballots, at least on the whole. If you narrowly tailor it, as we've talked about on this show, to the president, say, complaining about rushing to mail-in ballots in 2020, and that could promote fraud, that could violate tenets of election integrity, I'm absolutely on board with that. That's right. But he's been painting broad brushes. But just because I disagree with the president's opinion and the factual basis he claims to be representing in expressing that opinion does not mean that YouTube or Facebook or, in this case, Twitter should be noting, hey, this is factually wrong. Does not mean that Facebook or Twitter or YouTube should take down certain things that the President of the United States says or put them behind a block that says, oh, anybody else who said this, they would be completely removed. But the President of the United States gets an exemption because he's the president, so we're just going to put up this wall. But just because I disagree with Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or Google taking those sorts of steps, which, who knows, I may find myself the victim of something like that in the future, doesn't mean that the government should get involved or that government involvement is the right way to do it. Keep in mind, and we talked about this with Dave Rubin last week on the show, keep in mind that there are two reasons why a Facebook or a Twitter would embrace the right regulation. Number one, that's because that outlet would like to pawn off the responsibility of determining what should or should not be allowed speech-wise on the government. Oh, no, the government said we have to allow that, or the government said we can't allow that, or the government said we must put this fact check there or not put this fact check there. They could just have the weight lifted off of their shoulders as companies if the federal government takes particular steps that usurp that responsibility from the social media giants. Then they have some sort of a new kind of shield, which is the government. That's number one. Number two, this is the reason we talked about in the video earlier. Number two is that these big tech companies can push out new competitors that might be wanting to get into the mix because they put regulatory restrictions in there that are high bars for new private companies to come up with or to meet. So, for example, Mark Zuckerberg in 2004, along with some friends, created Facebook. Now Facebook is one of the most massive, significant, influential web companies in the world, created 16 years ago by a bunch of college kids at Harvard. What about the next Mark Zuckerberg? The next person who wants to go create a new company that will do something like Facebook, like Twitter, might be better than either of those, heck, even better than both of them combined. But there are regulations in place by the government that make it difficult, if not impossible, for that new company to get into the mix and compete with Facebook and Twitter. Big companies like pushing out competition by using regulation. So this is not a cut and dry, simple thing. You shouldn't just have the President of the United States unilaterally making decisions like this. And Congress definitely should not rush to judgment. A more hands-off approach with maybe some transparency requirements, like we talked about with Professor Eugene Volokh earlier in the show, that may be appropriate. But going all out and making all sorts of regulatory restrictions and putting in these requirements or saying you have to allow this or you can't allow that, that is a recipe for disaster and a recipe for the loss of individual liberty more and more in America than anything Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Google, Amazon could ever do. Thanks for watching this clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. You do not want to miss a minute of engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe today to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel and you'll be sure to catch our live broadcast. I appreciate your support.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.